First of all, great to see everybody, virtually at least. Good morning, and thank you for all taking the time to come and talk about this with us. So the last time I did one of these was right before the spring semester, when ChatGPT was only a couple months old, and the landscape has changed tremendously. And those of you who have heard me talk before know I'm usually a pretty optimistic person, but maybe not today so much. The landscape is challenging. I will just say it that. I don't think it is wonderfully awesome. I don't think it's necessarily the worst thing ever, but it's challenging, and it's going to challenge us in a variety of ways. And so I'll just start with this little caveat that I do every time I talk about ChatGPT, which feels like at least once a week, that ChatGPT and at least generative AI, at least text generating AI, is still less than 1 year old. ChatGPT first dropped at the end of November of last year. It will turn 1 after Thanksgiving. So it's still very new. And that means that we don't know the range of uses. We know that some of these things have certain strengths and limitations. We don't know if those are particular to any given program or if they're endemic to the class of large language models. We don't know if those limitations will be addressed by the makers, if they can be addressed even. And maybe more to the point, we also don't have any best practices yet. Best practices, by definition, take time to develop. You have to develop a practice, you have to repeat the practice, you have to analyze how well the practice worked. Other people have to adopt the practice. Other people have to adopt competing practices, and only then, after some time, can we as a field begin to see what works really well and what doesn't. And so we have 1 full semester under our belts, maybe a summer semester. We have some practices, we have some thoughts. We don't have best practices, and we won't for a few years, because that is the nature of best practices. They take time. And the landscape is constantly changing, which makes it more difficult for practices to really stick. So let's talk about the current landscape. And I will just keep in mind that when I talked about this in January, I talked about the current landscape, about a month and a half later, everything changed. There was a massive change in March. So this is the current landscape. Don't know if it'll still be the current landscape at the end of the semester. So the first thing is, I will freely use the phrase ChatGPT as a synonym for text generating AI, but it's not ChatGPT only. OpenAI, of course, has ChatGPT. The free version is based on GPT 3.5. There was a paid version based on GPT-4, which is a much more expanded model. If you don't want to pay, you can use Bing and the Edge browser in the creative mode and get access to it more or less for free. Meta, the company that owns Facebook and Instagram, has a large language model called Llama. You actually can't use it as a chatbot, but they do sell it as an API, which means developers can use it in their applications. Anthropic has a bot called Claude, based on its Claude. In case you're interested, it has a constitution of sorts, and it's been trained to be more ethical. It's actually quite interesting reading. And Google has Bard, among other AIs that it has and sells. And this is just the text generating ones that are widely available, either for your use through chatbots or in APIs. There are many other AIs out there that are generative AIs for art, for music, and others. I teach English, I run a writing center, I'm focusing on the text, but there's a wide variety of generative AIs with very little sign of slowing down. And it's not just that we have a multiplicity of products, because it's more than just the chatbots, right? ChatGPT, Llama, Claude, and Bard have these application programming interfaces, which means that a developer, instead of having to make their own artificial intelligence, they can simply buy access to one of these large commercial ones. They can simply take it as is, or they can customize it and create a custom version for themselves. Like Bloomberg News has Bloomberg GPT, which it's its own fork of GPT. A few others have done that. For the most part, this won't necessarily affect us in higher ed, but for the most part, some of you might be familiar with a program called Grammarly. Some of you might even encourage some of your students to use Grammarly. Grammarly now has Grammarly Go, which uses uses GPT-3. So basically, any student who's using, or any person who's using Grammarly can also use Grammarly Go. I think they might have to pay for it a little bit, but then they're really using ChatGPT. So artificial intelligence isn't just, it's just that there are many products. They're creeping into many, many applications, including some that you may very well have recommended to students in the past, and that you might want to rethink, especially if you don't want them using artificial intelligence. Very soon, it will be really difficult to find apps that don't, in some way, shape, or form, use artificial intelligence. And besides the widespread use of APIs, there are actually now more official integrations because Bard, which is owned by Google, Google has search, Google has Docs. One of the largest investors in OpenAI is Microsoft, which has Bing Search, which has Office. Microsoft also collaborated with Meta on its Llama AI. So they're everywhere. Bard is currently fully integrated into Google Search and into Google Docs, possibly only if you have the Labs feature enabled. If you have Labs enabled in Docs and in Search, that will give you early access to experimental features. When I open a brand new Google Doc, there was a little icon of a wand that is Bard living in my docs. It was an experimental feature in May. It might still be an experimental feature. It will not be an experimental feature for very long. It will be a standard feature. The same thing with its search results. ChatGPT-4, as I mentioned before, ChatGPT-4 is already integrated into Bing's creative mode. You must use the Edge browser and you must use Bing. But if you are there and you use creative mode, you basically have free access to ChatGPT-4 instead of paying OpenAI $20 a month. And this is going to thrill everybody. Microsoft is developing something it calls Copilot. Copilot is going to live inside of Office 365, which everybody at CUNY has access to. If you've done the two-factor authentication, you know that you have access to Office 365. Our students all have access to Office 365, and ChatGPT is coming. The only good news is that Office 365 costs every company a certain fee per user. So CUNY has like 300,000 users. They're paying something like $20 a head per month. And like the pricing that I've heard for Copilot is an additional $20 per person per month. I don't think CUNY is going to pay that kind of money every month for AI access, but I also assume the price will come down. And that some individual enterprising students might pay for it. But it's there. It will be there soon. And again, if it's not there this semester, it will be there in a few semesters. And ultimately, I think here's the most important point. Generative AI is becoming more and more ubiquitous. And therefore, it is more and more difficult for any person to avoid, including students. Last semester, it was fine for, I think, for us to tell students don't use it. But it's much because using it required them to go to OpenAI's website. It required them to go to bard.google.com when it came out. As text generating AI becomes more embedded into everything they're using, it's much more difficult to tell them not to use it. It's like telling someone don't use the spell check in your word processor. Well, don't use the AI that's built into your word processor. Use the grammar check in Grammarly, but not the writing assistant AI that's in Grammarly. It's a much harder sell for us. And even students that would not have chased down AI, they're being chased down by it now. And that's the current landscape. And so we come to detection. Well, if it's unavoidable, or it's not unavoidable, but very, very difficult to avoid, can we detect it? The short answer is not well. So, big question, can AI detect AI? And here's the thing, generative AI cannot detect itself. You cannot throw a piece of writing into ChatGPT or Bard and ask, did you write this? Because it doesn't know. These things are designed to generate text. They are even designed in some ways to read and summarize text. They are not designed to analyze it for authorship. If you throw the same piece of writing into ChatGPT 100 times, the odds are you'll get 50 yeses. Yes, I wrote it, and 50, no, I didn't. It's guessing wildly. That doesn't mean that detection is impossible. What it means, it's impossible for robots that were not designed to detect it. In principle, you can create an AI that can diagnose writing or anything else, but you're not training it to generate text. You're training it to find patterns of difference between human writing and text that is generated by AI, assuming that there are fundamental differences, even if they're subtle, given enough training materials of human written text and AI generated text, an AI can learn in principle to diagnose and spot the difference. In principle. In practice, everything that's come out so far is trash. Total trash. And we know kind of that they're trash. The first thing is, one, we have no way of independently verifying any claims that any company makes about how good their detectors are. They're black boxes. We don't know what they trained them on. We don't know what the AI detectors are looking for. So we have no way of knowing, of judging whether this makes sense as a difference between AI generated text and human writing. And so there's no way for us to independently verify any company's claims. The other thing is that almost all the claims don't differentiate between false positives and false negatives. And that's an incredibly important distinction, especially because they tend to be the inverse of each other. A false negative is when something is written by AI, but your detector says it's not. A false positive is when something was written by a person, but the detector says it was written by AI. If you want to screen out the negatives, what you have to do is fine-tune the detector to be much more sensitive, so that anything that seems like an edge case will be flagged as negative. But that will increase the rate of false positives. If you want to decrease the rate of false positive, you have to desensitize the test, but that will increase the rate of false negatives. So when a company like Turnitin says that they have a 98% detection rate, is that 2% false positive rate, 2% false negative rate? Which rate? They're never the same. They're never the same. And they say 98. Okay, 98% of what did you test? Like, it caught 98% of the things that you fed it. What about the things that we're feeding it? Do we have percentages for that? No, we don't. And so, and every time people have independently tried to test it, when Turnitin's AI detector came out a few months ago, the Washington Post ran a story. They tried testing it, was not close to 98% effective. Not even close. So the Washington Post independently turned it. And maybe the biggest indictment of AI detectors as a class is that in January, OpenAI, the makers of ChatGPT, made what they called an AI classifier available. And then last month, they pulled it down. They didn't make a public announcement. They edited their announcement from January, and they said they were taking it down because it was not accurate enough, that they were committed to finding ways to get accurate detection, but that it was so inaccurate that it's no longer available to use. So the makers of ChatGPT cannot yet make a detection tool. And any other detection tool, I've seen some that were like the CEO, like the person who's like selling this detector is a search engine optimization expert. These are not experts in artificial intelligence or in writing or in anything else. They don't work, at least not well enough. There are too many false positives, which means that if you use them, you are likely going to be falsely accusing some of your students. And I guess more to the point, we just have no way of knowing how good or bad these are. There's also growing evidence that they are biased, and they are biased against our student population. A team at Stanford fed like a dozen AI detectors text that was generated by AI and text from the TOEFL exam, which is written by students who are not speakers of English. It's a test of English as a foreign language. And there were many more false positives among the ESL writers than the native speakers. And the team at Stanford, when they used AI to change some of the phrasing of the TOEFL exams, like these human written exams, the false positives dropped. And that is because it seems that one of the methods that some of these detectors use is word frequency. The way text generators work, like ChatGPT, work is by finding the most likely next word. And so it makes sense that the most likely next word is going to be a very common word in the English language. If a word only appears once every like 20,000 words, it's not going to be the next most common word in any sentence, let alone this sentence that's being generated. Problem is that if you're learning a foreign language, you start learning the most common words first. So we have a lot of students here at CUNY and here at Hunter whose vocabularies are smaller, whose productive vocabularies are smaller, and they are much more likely to be flagged falsely by detectors that are looking at word frequency. And ironically, if they were to just throw their writing into a paraphrase generator and come up with all sorts of fancy nonsense words, it would be passed off as human writing because it uses unusual words. So, and what that means is that first, this mode of detection is terrible. It's a horrible diagnostic test. But it also means that like our population specifically is much more at risk for false accusations if you're using some of these tools. And again, like the key point, I know a lot of us, all of us, are looking for a solution. We want to be able to know, did a person write this or did a robot write this? But the problem is if a solution does not work, at least not reliably, and if it's biased against our particular students, it is not a solution. Which is why a number of organizations have recommended to faculty to stop using these detectors, at least not until they get better, independently, measurably better. So, what do we do? And more to the point, what does CUNY want us to do? Or what help is our university giving to us? The short answer is nothing right yet. There is no policy, CUNY-wide or Hunter-wide yet. But I can tell you because I am a sitting member of the Academic Affairs Committee of the University Faculty Senate, that there is a policy that changes to the academic integrity policy are in progress. And I know this because I was on the committee that drafted them. In April, the Academic Affairs Committee drafted changes. Those recommended changes to the academic integrity policy were unanimously passed by the University Faculty Senate in May. They were then referred to the administration. And I will just say that the administration was very much aware of the changes that were being recommended long before the UFS passed it because they had access to the Google Doc. We shared it with them. And they were commenting on it as we were drafting the changes. And after it was passed off the administration disseminated it to various campus stakeholders for comment, including some academic integrity officers and various comments. And so the last that I heard was like from a few weeks ago. I had a spreadsheet full of comments about the academic integrity policy, some of which were about the changes and some of which were about the policy in general. The basic principles that guided our recommendations for change is one, to explicitly include generative artificial intelligence as a potential source of academic dishonesty. There was a gap in the policy. The policy talked about having other people do your work for you, or it talked about copying from the internet. But an AI is not a person, but it also doesn't exist. The program exists on the internet, but the thing that it generates is from scratch. So it's not like a previously published thing. So we filled that gap. The emphasis is on unauthorized and unacknowledged use of artificial intelligence, which, and of course, the unauthorized gives faculty the leeway to determine course policies. You can decide to authorize certain uses and to not authorize others, but frankly, the same that you do with peer collaboration. You could let students work with each other on a piece of writing or a project, or you can tell them they could study together, but they can't actually work on the writing together. In the same way, you have the right to authorize use. And again, the other thing was about unacknowledged use. The same way that if you use any source and don't acknowledge it, it's plagiarism. And if you use any source and cite it properly, it is not. So unless there is massive surprise, these will pretty much be the changes to the academic integrity policy. And I will assume that once the administration hears all the comments and makes the revisions, sends it up to the Board of Trustees, and this gets published, which I think will take some time, but hopefully we'll have it in place by next semester, maybe the middle of this one. I assume then that the individual campuses, including our campus, will follow suit and make changes to our policy based on the CUNY-wide policy. But I think, again, because faculty are always going to have leeway, that means that even after CUNY publishes a revised academic integrity policy, and even after Hunter publishes a revised academic integrity policy, you will still have to make policy for your classes because they're your classes. And no one's going to do it for you. And quite frankly, no one should do it for you. And so I'm now going to pass it off to Sissel, who's going to talk about some of the policies that she has made for her classes.
All right. Thank you, Jack. And thank you, Julie, for helping me with my slides since my laptop and desktop did not sync up this morning. But hi, everyone. I'm delighted to be here to talk to you about my experience with ChatGPT last semester and some of the things that work and didn't work. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please, Julie, in terms of what I did with classroom assignments and exercises. Then I'll show you my language in my syllabus for my fall syllabus, and then share with you some of my ChatGPT proof, in quotes, assignments and exercises that I plan to use for the fall. All right, next slide. So in the spring, I did come up with 2 exercises to show students that we were aware of ChatGPT and to try to encourage them to use it ethically and responsibly. So we did a writing exercise where I put our prompt for one of our reflective essays on a 48-hour news blackout into ChatGPT, and it instantly wrote it in really like 30 seconds or less, and then had students compare that output to a real student's essay. And I thought that worked pretty well. Students actually saw right away that ChatGPT was very challenged to come up with personal experiences and anecdotes and reflection on how it felt about the blackout. In fact, at one point, it thought we meant a electricity blackout, a power blackout, and I had to adapt the prompt to make sure that it didn't write about that. And then we did a second exercise on fact checking, where students fact checked a paragraph that ChatGPT wrote about the first bear to travel in space on a Soviet rocket. It had lots of details and citations, but students very quickly found out that the citations were completely made up. So we thought we did a pretty good job. This is actually for, I should say, my Media 211 class, which is News Literacy in a Digital Age. It's a writing course that satisfies the English Composition 2 requirement, and it's a hybrid course. So I tape the lectures and then we meet for a 75-minute lab. I actually had 10 sections in the spring, so I co-teach it with about 8 other adjuncts. And we did this in all our labs. It was pretty well received. We thought we did a great job, explaining the advantages and disadvantages of ChatGPT. And then next slide, we realized that we did not do enough. We actually had 12 plagiarism cases, or 11 plagiarism cases and 1 cheating case. 12 students, all 12 students admitted to using ChatGPT on either their essays or a midterm exam. One student did it on a makeup midterm with me sitting right behind him. Sort of shocking. But the way that we did spot it, we did not use the detective tools at all. We noticed that some of the reading quotes, the students actually have to incorporate reading quotes into their essays to show that they're synthesizing the material and applying the concepts. And we use the same textbook every semester. It's called Elements of Journalism. And ChatGPT took quite some liberties with the quotes from the Elements of Journalism. And since we are so familiar with the text, it was very easy for us to spot those. And then we started checking all the quotes in these essays. And we, very quickly found that there were other students who were doing this. All the students were reported to the Office of Student Conduct, and they did receive a 0 on the assignments. That said, to put this in context, I've had 2 Office of Student Conduct cases, plagiarism cases in 8 years, and I had 12 last semester. So I really want to do a better job this fall about laying out what my expectations are for students in this class. Next slide, Julie. So here is the language, one more click, that I'm including in my syllabus. There it is. I'll just read a little bit about you. The parts that are highlighted are some new language that I've included. And what I tried to do when I came up with this statement is put it in the affirmative, why we want them to do their own critical thinking and their own writing, rather than come at them and say, you know, do not do this, do not do that. So, and this is how our integrity, academic integrity statement has always started. Integrity and credibility are the pillars of journalism and fundamental principles throughout this course. All our assignments are designed to help you hone your expository writing and critical thinking skills to essential learning outcomes that will prepare you for a competitive workplace, whatever your career. I do have a lot of students who are not journalism students in this class because it does satisfy that EC2 requirement. So this is some of the new language. Therefore, all assignments submitted in this class must be your original work and written by you alone. Copying and pasting from the internet or another student's work without attributing the source is plagiarism, whether intentional or not. We did have several students say, oh, I didn't know. While you may use AI tools like ChatGPT or Grammarly for feedback, and we are going to do an exercise on that, so I'll explain that in a minute, on how to improve your writing, using any AI tools to write your assignments is strictly prohibited and will be treated as plagiarism. And then this last line, Julie, if you click one more time, I did highlight this. Anyone presenting someone else's writing as their own, whether from another student or the internet or any AI tool generating text that is copied into your work, will receive a 0 for the assignment and will be reported to the Office of Student Conduct. So I'm trying here to be very explicit about how we will allow and encourage them to use it. We're going to do, in fact, an in-class assignment where ChatGPT is going to give feedback on an essay. But if they are actually taking full sentences that are generated by text, we are considering that plagiarism. So I wanted to make that very clear to students. Okay, next slide. So I did some research preparing for the fall semester to look at how I could adapt some of my assignments to really incentivize students to use their own critical thinking and writing skills rather than ChatGPT's. And so this is what I found. Go ahead and click. So assignments that are personal and reflective. Lucky for me, I already did have one of those assignments in this class. It's a reflective essay on a 48-hour news blackout. So I just needed to update the language a little bit about that. Next one, assignments that are contextualized. So what this means is assignments that really apply concepts in a way that students can relate to and to show that the concepts they're learning are useful. Next, assignments that relate to real world and current events. Again, tying what they're learning to the real world and beyond college. Next one. In-class writing assignments, right? You can't use ChatGPT for those. And last one, yeah, metacognitive assignments, posts that actually reflect on their writing and learning process. A lot of professors do that at the end of the semester. So this is how I turned that research into my assignments for the fall semester. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So I have the reflective essay. So this is something that we always do, but I've now added some more detailed language about what I expect students to include, including 2 to 3 anecdotes, details about what happened, how they felt, and what they learned from that experience. This is very hard for, obviously, ChatGPT to come up with. Then we have a couple of close textual analysis essays. Students look at news articles to determine whether they're credible. That's the whole point of our course, is giving students the tools they need to determine, to access and determine if information that they find online is truthful and accurate. So we actually have them analyze texts from news stories, actual news stories, and then they have to use our tools to determine whether this is information that is reliable and actionable. And they have to include 4 of our reading quotes from the syllabus, all our syllabus readings. So this I think satisfies that contextualized assignment because it is something that they're going to be doing in the real world. Next one, we have a team project actually where they do a deep dive on a conspiracy theory. So they're in groups of 4, and they have to give a 15-minute presentation at the end of the semester. This semester, we're doing the big lie, the Great Reset, the dangers of COVID vaccines, and climate change as a hoax. So this is a semester-long survey, and they are having to research who's behind these conspiracy theories, who they appeal to, what do the people behind it have to gain, what is the epistemic threat to society from these conspiracy theories. So it's a really big deep dive, and they actually have to present this to the class. Then I do an in-class essay, a writing assignment on the midterm. The midterm is on Blackboard, but they obviously are not allowed to use any outside writing assistance for that. And then they do a final blog post on what their journey becoming a more news literate consumer, and some of the things they learned in the class, and what they're going to carry on doing. And then finally, here are some of the exercises that I'm going to be doing in class this semester. I'm still going to have them look at the ChatGPT essay versus a student essay. That actually was pretty effective. We'll still do, go ahead, Julie, the fact-checking exercise. And then I've added one more exercise, and that is we're going to actually put in the first draft of one of their final essay, which is a closed textual analysis of a news article, and ask ChatGPT to provide feedback and compare that to the feedback that their professor gives them to see how reliable and how helpful it is. I will show you, next slide, some of the feedback that ChatGPT does provide. I'll be honest, it's pretty good, and very similar to some of the feedback that I provided the student. Provide more details, include your thoughts and feelings, offer a deeper analysis, and add a conclusion. So that's it. 100% created with human content for this one. And I'm happy to take your questions after Xiao wraps us up. Xiao, over to you.
Thank you, Sissel. Thank you, Jack. I am going to start my SWAY presentation. If you'd like to follow along, just put the link in the chat. So my role here is to mention a few of the resources that might be helpful to you. And I want to say that all the presenters and I agreed on the resources. We thought that they were good resources to share with you, but the emphasis is mine. So they will reflect my own biases as I share, what I think is important from the resources. So the first one is actually provided by the Modern Language Association in the Conference on College Composition and Communication. So they worked together they had a task force, and they worked on a paper, an AI working paper with an overview of the issues, the statements, a statement of principles, and some recommendations. And I think it's actually a balanced discussion of risk and benefits. So as you can see, they talk about risk to language, literature, and writing instruction and scholarship, and they talk about students and teachers in programs in the profession. Then they talk about the benefits, right? And then at the end of the paper, they also have some recommendations. And I've selected a few. Again, my own biases, these are the ones that I thought were most important. They do talk mostly about institutions, but here, number 8, they say that we should prioritize the development of critical AI literacy in faculty leaders and higher education administrators, because critical AI literacy is now part of digital literacy. So I think it's important to mention that. In number 10, in the recommendation, they say that we should dedicate time and resources considering new guidelines for faculty use of AI by stakeholders and leaders, because they provide both opportunities for efficiency and new labor attached to educating, evaluating, and supporting learners. And the last recommendation that they offer is that we should communicate with students, colleagues, and the public about the continuing value of writing for developing thinking. So this is that working paper. And then also we picked a few articles from the Chronicle of Higher Education. I saw in the chat earlier that Joel mentioned that, yes, the Chronicle really does have a few very good articles, and we picked 2. One is actually called 4 Steps to Help You Plan for ChatGPT in Your Classroom, written by Flower Darby. If you click on the link, it will take you to the article. Okay, so it will look like that. And if you click on Flower Darby's name, it will show you her credentials, and she recommends these 4 steps. First, to get familiar with the generative AI tools. And that's actually my recommendation and many of our recommendations from those of us who are, getting questions from faculty. What do I do? Well, I think you need to actually play with the tool. So become familiar with the tool and get to know what it does and what it does not do well. Of course, you want to get ready to talk about it in class. It's a huge elephant in the room. You can't ignore it, I don't think, anymore. So, understand it a little bit and get ready to talk about it in class. And if you suspect that students are using AI-related tools for cheating, don't rush to hand out Fs, okay? Think about it, and if you do use plagiarism detection tools, do so with a hefty degree of caution, just like Jack mentioned earlier today. The second article that we picked also because they're very recent, just got published. This one is called, Should You Add an AI Policy to Your Syllabus? I think the answer from most of us here is actually a big yes, right? But then do it do it after you do some reading, after you factor, what to factor into your AI policy. Revisit what your institution has in terms of academic integrity. And remember that this is changing very fast. This landscape is changing fast. Be detailed in your do's and don'ts. I'm not so sure about this. Some people recommend that you not be so detailed because you want to give yourself a little room for a little leeway in case you need to make changes. But definitely, I like these last 2. Do your assignments, ask yourself, do your assignments and projects and tests need a makeover? And I think for most of us, it's actually a big yes too. And you want to talk to your colleagues, you want to think about, what changes you might need to make, and workshop the syllabus language with your colleagues. I think that's an important recommendation. And then the last one, I think it echoes what Jack said. This is not the end of us. Things are changing. We need to adapt and we'll figure it out. So again, if you click on the links, it will take you to the article. So this is the second article from the article. All right. And so then we also wanted to help you with some language. So this instructional designer, Lance Eaton, has compiled. He put together a Google Doc that kind of looks like this, and he just invited people to contribute. Means if you click on the link here, it will take you to this Google Doc, and it's a living document, so he keeps adding to it. And it looks like this, and you'll see that he's compiled policies in classroom language and syllabus language from all different universities and fields, and it's a little bit overwhelming. So I would say that if you're looking at this, maybe do a search, right? Do a Control F to do a search, and maybe try to find a class that is more similar to yours in the field that's more similar to yours. Okay, so I'll just make you dizzy by scrolling a little bit, but just to let you see that this is the variety that you get when you come here. And of course, if you want to contribute, he does have a link to let you contribute with your language when you come up with it. And then to continue the conversation throughout this fall semester, we're going to do a series of Brainstorm Mondays. At the Center for Online Learning, we had been doing brainstorm sessions, and we decided that on every Monday, every third Monday of every month, we're going to focus on AI. We won't have specific presenters, but we hope that you come and share ideas, concerns, effective practices, and resources. So we do have the dates posted. So if you click on this link, it'll take you to our website, and this is actually the description and the days and registration links. Okay, and then what we'll do is actually pop up the tool. Okay, so this is Google Bard, and this is ChatGPT. It's actually 3.5. It's not the paid version of 4, but the free version. And we'll just put in the prompts, your prompts. And what you see here are some prompts that I just did a couple of days ago. I asked it to give me ideas for icebreakers in a college class. Then I asked Bard to tell me what should I include in an orientation module for my college course. And as you can see, it does a decent job. It's pretty Okay, and then I said, well, write me a warm welcome message for my students. This is Bart, and he gave me this version, and this version. And he will also read it out loud to me, and he will also allow me to generate more drafts. Okay, so we'll play with the tools if you come. All right, so that's my part of the presentation. I will now give the mic back to Julie.